to start by thanking NEC and Rave and Yadu for inviting me to speak here again. I've been enjoying this gathering for a number of years, and I appreciate that Yadu and the organization continues to provide us with this forum. For those of you that don't know me, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Ann Michael, and I'm the CEO of Delta Think, a strategic data-driven consultancy focused on innovation and scholarly communications. Since starting Delta Think in 2005, I've worked with well over 100 different organizations in the scholarly communications ecosystem. And I've spent all of my career fascinated with change, with transition and transformation for more years than I care to count. I've seen a lot of organizations attempt fundamental changes in their culture and execution, but have not seen an overwhelming number of successes. Often a lot of fanfare and excitement is ultimately followed by backsliding into behaviors and practices that the organization was hoping to change. They don't reach their goals. And in my opinion, one of the key reasons that these organizations didn't make it to their goals was that they just scratched the surface on what was needed for true transformation. They may have stopped at changing their structure or their incentives or adopting new methodologies, but they never really changed how they worked or what they believed success looked like. Most organizations changed the words that they used, but not much more than that. They reverted to approaching their work as they always had, and the majority of individuals were genuine in their commitment to transform, but it just didn't take. Why? Changing values and behaviors is hard, and it doesn't simply happen because it's the logical thing to do or because it's mandated by someone in the organization. There are a network of interconnected changes, transitions, and experiments that everyone needs to go through to get to the other side. There's also a huge dependency on commitment from a large portion of the organization to move real change forward. Now, there's no way that we could cover everything that needs to be in place or all of the variations and permutations that can occur along the way during a transformation process in our session today. And I would not even pretend to know them all, and certainly not to be expert in them. What I'd like to discuss is some elements of organization design and how dynamic teaming might start us on the path of real change. And my hope is that in talking about some underlying concepts that some of you may walk away with new ideas, new commitment, and maybe just a little inspiration that it is possible for an organization to grow and to change. And so you might be asking yourself, well, why does this even matter? So every year when we come to this conference, we hear examples of innovations, of new technologies, of new uses for content and data, and new methods for learning more about our customers. Well, under any circumstances, we'd find these products, practices, and methodologies interesting. They feel especially important now. It appears we are all becoming painfully aware that change keeps progressing at a faster and faster rate. And what got us here will not likely get us where we need to go, get us to that next stage of evolution or some kind of sustainable relevance, honestly, individually or organizationally. As user expectations, data capabilities, technology, and global circumstances accelerate and evolve around us, we need to evaluate why we exist and how we add value to the industry. To do that, we need to maintain a meaningful and deep connection with our customers. To do that, we need to adopt a growth mindset to learn and to iterate. To do that, we need to make good decisions quickly and execute on them effectively. That's a lot to ask of a traditional hierarchical command and control structure. Yet that is the structure that predominantly exists within the decision-making and management in most scholarly organizations. Traditional hierarchical work structures often create functional verticals that can become decision-making silos, with only a few individuals in an organization that are charged with considering the full organizational view, decision-making can be slowed, individuals can feel disempowered, and customer perspective can be unclear. What we need to do is to think differently about how we work, why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and finally, what exactly we're doing. Well, why should we transform? We've kind of talked about a few reasons, and I'm going to pull up a few things from the last time I spoke here to remind us. But we want to transform to deepen our understanding of what? Well, pretty much of everything, of our environment, of our customer, of the ecosystem we're operating in. We want to try to identify new perspectives and opportunities to generate new insights, and then to effectively and fluidly execute and reduce friction in our own execution, reduce friction that users experience on our platforms and interacting with us. But we really want to be relevant to researchers, relevant to scholarly communications, and maybe even a bit exciting. Last time I was here, I talked about the culture deck that HubSpot had put out. And in their estimation, what was the destination they were looking for? They were trying to become more customer-centric, to break down silos within their organization, effectively partner with other organizations, increase agility, and leverage data in decision-making. And I loved the way they put it, that you can't add simplicity, you have to take complexity out. And leveraging data and technology really do require us to transform into a more fluid and effective organization, no matter who we are and where we are. Because we need to explore and adjust, we need to try things, we need to learn about things that we don't really know about. As we're starting to think about new markets and new customer needs, there's a lot we don't know. And the old approach to a waterfall implementation, and I'm not simply talking about a technology waterfall, I'm talking about waterfall in general, even in our business cases and in how we conduct our business, that's just not going to work for us. We need to hone our listening and watching skills, and we need to have a commitment to increasing our agility. We also need to truly collaborate to leverage everyone in our organization, and maybe even people that aren't in our organization. And we have to have the confidence to know when to ask for help. So we don't just have to think differently, we have to act differently. And this is, again, an image that taken from ThoughtWorks that I used last year, but for a different purpose. But ultimately, we need to form our teams around our goals. We need to put in frameworks and processes that empower and support experimentation, build strong connections collaboratively inside and out, and be transparent and distributed in how we make decisions. We should be thinking about building connective tissue within our organizations, not restrictive tissue. It's very often the case when you go into different organizations that a lot of energy is put into control. Into controlling who sees what, who does what, who makes which decisions, and less energy is put into educating and supporting folks in order to help decisions be made where there's the most information about the object of the decision. And when you start to think about building connective tissue, you need everyone to focus on the customer. You need everyone to embrace experimentation. You need everyone to be committed to increasing flexibility and effectiveness, to teaming with each other, collaborating in a really tangible way. And they need to have shared goals tied to a clear mission and strategy in order to facilitate organizational alignment and to make the right decisions. To change how we work, we really do need to think of, we need to change how we think about our roles and the roles of others within our organization. We need to start thinking about the enterprise at an enterprise level. Of course, we may be affiliated with a particular group or a particular team and have a specific responsibility, but it's not until we consider the bigger picture and how we all fit together and come together to serve the needs of the customer and work as a system to leverage all of our capabilities that we'll truly find success. So again, making the customer everyone's responsibility. Of course, there's likely an area that is focused on market research or user satisfaction or support, but everyone needs to understand the customer's perspective and take it upon themselves to always be working towards a better user and customer experience. We need to leverage diverse skill sets at every stage of product development. One of the things that I find interesting in a lot of organizations is that individuals, and I think this is just natural, I've done it myself, we tend to understand the complexities of what we do. And we are, if we're not careful, tend to underestimate the complexities of someone else and what they do. So it's not uncommon to get in an organization that isn't truly thinking like a system to hear someone not understand the value of marketing or not understand the, how a particular system works or the value of certain technology expertise. When we start to leverage and value diverse skill sets, a very interesting thing happens. We start to create a team that is more likely to consider each other and more likely to consider the enterprise perspective. And when we do that, we start to enable distributed decision-making, which increases our velocity. So we start to make it easier for people to make decisions because they are confident that others in the organization respect and trust their expertise, and they respect and trust the expertise of others. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately with several of my colleagues is the idea of dynamic teaming. A concept that gets in the way, in my opinion, of organizational effectiveness is actually the concept of ownership. And what I mean by that, because I think ownership is pretty much perceived as a very positive thing, is that when you think of someone or some department owning something, you're basically drawing a box around it, a box that's hard to get in and a box that's also hard to get out of. When instead you start thinking of accountability, who's accountable for meeting a certain objective at a certain point in time, then all of a sudden you're able to start dynamically shifting who's on a team, how they interact, when different expertise is called in to support a project or an initiative. And that becomes really powerful because one group can start with accountability, can shift it off like a baton to another group while they still might maintain some interaction. And the effort continues to get the resource and the expertise that's required in order to make it successful. A concept that I like to think about in connection with dynamic teaming and in organizational design is also the concept of skill density and distribution. So every organization needs a diverse set of skills, but they need to exist at various densities, different levels of expertise distributed across the organization. There are several examples of this, but a really good example is data-informed decision-making. So if you think about it, of course, you're going to need an area with deep expertise in data, acquisition, cleansing, transformation of taking data, making it interoperable and making it accessible. You're going to need some deep expertise in analysis, and depending on who you are and what you do, those analytical skill sets could be quite advanced. But if you really want your organization to hum, if you really want it to be considering data every step of the way, informing the decisions that they're making, then you also need to have literacy of data and some ability to manipulate, not just interpret data that exists distributed throughout the organization. So you need the area of expertise, but you also need the hooks, that can grab on to the fruits of that expertise and really apply them to subject matters, to different areas of the organization that have different skill sets. Project management is another good example of that. You might have project managers or program managers that are centralized or dedicated, but everybody needs a little project management to get through their day to some extent. So another concept that I want to talk about is, again, putting these two things together, dynamic teaming and the idea of skill density and distribution, to build connective tissue within your organization, to break down silos. The concentration and that ability to share or advance accountability to different parties starts to break down what has historically been much harder and faster lines between organizations. Another thing I've been thinking a whole lot about lately is how you communicate the relationships between people in organizations and how you can do that in a way that isn't hierarchical. So some of the folks that are listening now may find this familiar. This is a generic version of what I've been calling the balloon animal diagram. So in a traditional organizational hierarchical chart, what do you see first? What you see is, this is the person on top, and these are the next two people or three people, and here's how everyone lines up in a command and control structure. If you look deep enough, you might see titles, or you might even see some hint as to areas of responsibility. But when you look at this chart, what I'm hoping you see first is the team purpose. So these purple circles are why these people come together, what they do on a daily basis, and how they serve the organization and each other. The gray circles are the leadership of those teams. So you could say this is the hierarchy embedded in here, just not in your face. And then the darker gray circle is potentially someone who's leading team leaders as well as individual contributors. And what I'm hoping to do with looking at an organization in this manner is not so much completely upend, the organizational way of doing things, but help people to focus on the fact that most of us really are teaming on a regular basis, and that the people that we may report to are only significant to us for certain reasons. So, for example, if you take the role of a manager and you think about, what does a manager do for someone? There's administrative human resources capabilities. There are professional development, whether technically on actual specific attributes or tasks that you do on your job, or more like career advising, or even around soft skills or other skills that are integral to your job. When you start to think about teams and you start to look at your team differently, you could even potentially start to tease these things apart. I'm going to be moderating a session at Contech on November, I think it's the 16th and the 17th this year. And in my session, I'm going to have 3 CEOs that are in different stages of truly transforming their organizations, not only related to how they think about their work, but how they relate to each other. I'm actually very excited about the session. And I can tell you the 3 CEOs that will be there will be Alex Vance from the American Institute of Physics, Vicki Williams from Emerald Publishing, now Emerald Publishing Group actually, and Daniel Ebnetter from Cargill. And they've each started this transformation, taking into account many of these principles that I've touched on today, and they've started to make deep changes in how they do things. And they've also, in that process, embraced 2 very critical concepts which go together: experimentation and iteration. So the idea that they're going to put things forward and try them, and then with the help of these teams, with the help of everyone in the organization, they're going to iterate on them to find a way that where they can be as nimble as they need to be to meet current market needs, as as experimental, as innovative as they need to be. And also create an environment where people are very happy to work and are happy to be part of this environment. And so that's all that I'd really like to go through today. I'm happy to go through any questions. There are a lot of different concepts here, and I really do thank you for your patience and your attention.
So we have a question from David in the chat. How do these ideas scale? Are they universally applicable? So that's actually a really interesting question. So they actually theoretically scale well. And that is because when you start to think about dynamic teaming and the idea of getting people familiar and clear about how to, basically RACI something, how to understand who's accountable, who's responsible, who's consulted, who's informed, and then also what their decision-making mode is. The teams, as they're empowered to do so, get really good at shifting that around and understanding when they're at one point or another. I think it's really, really hard at first. It's not a natural way for a lot of folks to think. But ultimately, when it's not someone saying, here's how you do everything, but the teams themselves organizing, it actually can be quite scalable. And as far as universal applicability, that's actually a great question. I think one of the things that in some of the organizations I'm dealing with that we're working through is iteration. Let's work through it, see how it works. And if we find areas where it isn't effective, if there are areas that are maybe very task oriented or very repetitive or whatnot, I guess there's two questions. Does this work there? And getting back to some core questions, is this particular thing part of our unique value proposition? And should we be doing it at all? So Yadu has a question. Do you find differences in the rate of transformation and publishing in other industries? I think it's very difficult to say that. My gut feel from my limited view would be yes, but I'm not sure it's because other industries have started the process earlier than a lot of publishers have, or because they've been more effective at it. What I can say is that in a lot of, like, for example, societies and organizations that have complex governance structures, that can be a little bit of a drag on the process. And I guess not so much a drag, so much as a lot more folks that you have to consult with and work with and really understand what you're aiming for and how it works. So it just takes a little longer to build the coalition that you need to get moving. So Bridget, letting go of hierarchies makes many senior leaders feel very vulnerable, so they will try to hang on to power for dear life. What's your advice for supporting this transition in the boardroom? That's a great question. And I do think that, like anything else that you're doing with a group of people, the idea of building understanding and coalition is really, really important. If you start to change, if you start to get some advocates in that boardroom and you start to show some experimentation and some results, maybe with small parts of an organization, it's very difficult for folks to argue with results. So, I mean, that's classic change management, right? Is start. And it's kind of hard to start in one group or another, but it's possible only because every group interacts with every other group. But I would say my advice is to build a coalition, start to work on some small wins in pilot areas and express the wins, and also express the learning along the way, because I think one of the problem about hierarchies is also they tend to be waterfall. So what happens is it's really good for people to see that iteration was required, that we didn't just go off in a room and wait until we had every single I dotted and T crossed and everything was perfect, go out, unveil this, and just, utopia occurred. It was, let's start this, let's try this. Oh, this isn't working. What if we did it this way? Oh, wait, we're actually not really great at that. What if we get help? And then they see that that's how you get to the result faster than trying to do this upfront planning. Okay, I don't think there are other questions, which is fine. Why is academic publishing slow to change? Is it because it's a very sticky business? So, I guess, well, I do agree that academic publishing can be slow to change. I also feel as though they kind of get knocked for this a lot. So when you go into academic publishing, oftentimes these are people that care about what they do. They've had quality defined in a certain way. They care about the output, they care about the industry, the mission, and they're very reluctant, honestly, in some cases, with good reason, to impact or to negatively impact their product. And so I think that the reason why sometimes folks in publishing and in academic publishing can be slow to change is that I think the case needs to be made. And those examples, we need to find a compromise state where we can start to do things a little bit differently. They can see some of those results and we can help move them along. So we've basically hired into this industry detail-oriented technicians, and by that I mean scientists and doctors and folks that all of these details matter. And then we're saying to them, this is how much we know, let's get started. And it's only natural that they want more. So somehow we need to work with folks to understand that here's what you get now, here's our actual learning objective and what we want to get out of this. Here's how we're going to judge whether we got that. And based on this particular learning, we'll take the next step. And that's how we're going to go. And what you're going to gain by this is the fact that you're not going to have to make very large adjustments, or quite frankly, have very large misses that you don't know until you've invested a whole lot of time and money in down the road. So I don't know if that's a good answer, Yadu, but I think there's personality traits that are valuable in scholarly communications that are difficult in transformation initiatives. So what are the measures of success that you would look for in these approaches? To a person with a KPI, change can look kind of scary. Yeah, so I think that's a great question too. And we've been kind of thinking about this in a lot of ways. So if you're talking about product development, you might want to look at measures of success being your innovation funnel, what's going through it, what's at different stages, what are the learnings that you've had that have impacted changes to your direction that have had posive customer impact or resulted, given enough time, in maybe an MVP or a successful product. It will take time though to get to some of those KPIs. I think some measure of velocity is really important. How quickly does the organization pull in information and consider it and change their direction? How many things have they killed? Because if everything's going in and nothing is dying, that's probably not not a good sign. So what specific areas are publishers focusing on with regard to digital transformation? Well, so this is kind of a little nit of mine. I don't like to separate out digital transformation from transformation, because successful digital transformation actually requires successful cultural transformation. And I actually think this is where sometimes we get it wrong. We think about digital transformation, we think about data, we think about platforms, we think about, this digital first experience and having everything connected. But if we're not careful to have an organization that's culturally able to use all of that, all of these new tools and processes and perspectives and leverage them to the value of the customer, then have we really transformed, even if everything is in digital form and our data is accessible and interoperable, and if people don't know how to use it, for example. So I think that, in general, data and data capabilities are probably the largest area that people are focusing on for digital transformation. The idea of really understanding who the customer is, what they do, how they do it, when they do it, how we can help them do it better, how can we make life easier for them. But I would hesitate to separate digital from the overarching transformation culturally as well. So if you hear banging, I have people on my roof, so I apologize for that. I think that is it on the questions. And oh wait, where are publishers on the data analytics spectrum? Everywhere. I mean, if you want to take them as an industry, I mean, obviously there are publishers anywhere near the sophistication of financial analysts or credit card companies or some of these other larger organizations that have been at this for a long time and have data been part of their culture and their product for a long time. Absolutely not. So I would say publishers for the most part are maybe starting their, some are on their training wheels, some are taking their training wheels off. And I don't necessarily think any of them are toward the, jetpack side of the spectrum here, at least not that I've seen, and I'd love to hear that. But even that's not fair because there are a lot of experiments going on. And the very fact that there are a lot of experiments, and I think we're going to hear from someone who's done some of them right after me, is really exciting. So I do think that publishers are, they're on the board and they are trying to move forward as an industry. Some are going faster than others, but there's a long way to go, and in a way that's really exciting. Sorry, how much of the work I do is visualization versus ingestion? Again, I don't have a view of the entire industry but from what I would see, you're accurate that they are very much on the side of, ETL and getting things in, getting them usable, getting data usable, making it interoperable, cleaning it, transforming it, all of that kind of stuff. I would say most publishers, where most people start, someone at PLOS who used to work with me said this, and it's true. She said, I count stuff. And years ago, that was true. The first thing they do is number of submissions, number of publications, things like that. First things they do is count. Then they start getting into maybe some correlation. I don't think a whole lot of them are into predictive modeling. And there's a few reasons for that. And sometimes, part of the reason for that is they also, in order to do predictive modeling, they usually have to start bringing in external data sources. So they have to be good at that too, because the more data, the better the prediction, right? And they also have to be at the point where they've done enough exploration that they know what questions they want to ask and what they actually want to try to predict. So, I think that's the hardest skill to learn in any industry, and publishing is starting to get there, which is, what are the important questions? I think publishers in general have been more use case focused. So I need to understand who publishes with me, because I need to put together a read and publish deal, and I need to understand which institutions are within this consortia or things like that. And so they've started to get their data to be better and better to do that. But I don't think many of them have gotten really into prediction. So the last question, what have been the reaction? So interestingly enough, I would say cautious excitement. I think that a lot of the folks that I talk with are real excited by the idea of distributed decision making, of moving faster, of being trusted by their organization to make decisions, of having their expertise be valued and having it be integrated effectively with other folks' expertise, of breaking down some of the silos that have occurred because of the natural inclination toward hierarchy. Nervous, not sure how it all works. But I think those are good things. And I think that someone that's not nervous and not a little anxious isn't really thinking about it. Anyway, not sure who I hand off to, but I think we're through the questions. And thank you.